This video was made possible by Shopify, the platform behind Wendover and hundreds of thousands of others online stores. The last 5 years have been the most consistently profitable and financially successful years ever for the world's commercial airlines. Including the 2019 forecast, they've earned more than $160 billion in combined profit over this period. With a world economy more robust and connected than ever, the aviation industry is flying high. Or at least most of it. In these same 5 years, the world has seen some extremely high-profile airline collapses, and the frequency of these seems to only be picking up. The trend truly began in 2017 when Monarch, a well-respected British leisure airline with 50 years of history, went belly up. The very same month, Air Berlin, a massive airline with over 8,000 employees and 100 planes, also ceased operations. 2018 then saw the end of Primera Air, an airline that generated buzz but seemingly flew too close to the sun in its final days with its low-cost transatlantic flights, and Cobalt Air, a small Cypriot carrier. 2019, though, was the year of slaughter. WOW Air, a huge player in the low-cost transatlantic market, stopped flying. Aigle Azur, France's second-largest airline, stopped flying. XL Airways France, a long-existing transatlantic airline, stopped flying. Adria Airways, a mid-sized Slovenian airline, stopped flying. Then, after 50 years of history, Thomas Cook Airlines suddenly too stopped flying in what entered the record books as the largest UK airline collapse ever. Worth noting is that the aforementioned airlines are not cherry-picked names. It's certainly not the definitive list of airline collapses in the past 3 years, but they are most all the highest profile ones, and with these, there are two interesting patterns. Firstly, every single one of these airlines is based in Europe. Secondly, and perhaps more strangely, every single one of these airlines, with the exception of WOW Air, stopped flying in either the month of September or October. Neither the pattern in location or times of these collapses is a coincidence. There are very good reasons behind these trends. For the timing, you see, in general airlines' most profitable season by far is summer, since that's when there's the most demand. There are certainly exceptions to this rule. For example, an airline flying between the northern and southern hemisphere a substantial amount, like Qantas, typically sees more consistent month-to-month profits as it benefits from the demand in both the northern and southern summer. The seasonality of demand also varies significantly by region. For example, here are a few years of overall month-to-month passenger figures in the US. You can see there's a clear peak each August and a clear valley each February, with smaller secondary peaks each year for Thanksgiving and Christmas. If you take a look at Europe's month-to-month figures though, you can see how relatively stable the US's traffic is. Relying much more on leisure demand, which is highly seasonal, European airlines have to cope with winter demand being almost half that of summer demand. Airlines in the US, though, carry more business travelers in proportion, who tend to book more consistently throughout the year, and therefore they don't have as much excess capacity in the winter. There are even regions like Asia Pacific that see nearly no seasonality in their demand, but the main thing to know is that Europe has highly seasonal traffic, which means the timing of when its airlines make their money is highly seasonal. For example, take a look at Ryanair's quarterly gross profit graph. In 2018, they made $901 million from January to March, $1.4 billion from April to June, then an enormous $2.1 billion from July to September. The fall was then definitively their weakest quarter, with only $877 million made. Essentially, they made 3/4 of their profits in half the year. The problem airlines then have, though, is cash flow. For the busy summer season, airlines will get paid for tickets in the months leading up to those flights. Therefore, most of the money for that season will get to them between March and August. It's therefore a season that can typically sustain even the financially weakest airlines. Come September, though, bookings start to dry up, and therefore, so does cash flow. With that, airlines will start to struggle to pay off their debts, let alone the cost for fuel and other operating expenses. Once an airline starts to fall behind on their debts, it tends to be a vicious cycle. Quickly, they might have planes repossessed, which means they have to cancel flights, which means they have to pay for hotels and penalties and for rebooking, and pretty soon, the airline won't have enough money to operate and will be declared bankrupt. In Europe, unlike the US, there is little opportunity for business to restructure once bankrupt, so, for the most part, that means they're closed down immediately and indefinitely. As the aviation industry is so volatile and capital intense, these bankruptcies can happen impressively fast. In Thomas Cook's case, there had been hints of its financial difficulties for months, but at the end of August, it seemed the company would likely be saved by a buyout deal. It only truly became clear that the airline was headed towards its end the very week of its collapse, but still, everything went on as normal from an operational standpoint. On September 22nd, at 9:40 p.m., the airline tweeted in response to a customer saying, "Our flights and holiday operations are operating as normal." That was true at the time. All the flights were taking off, they were still selling tickets, everything was normal from the public perspective. Behind closed doors, though, things were not okay. 5.5 hours later, in the early hours of the morning of September 23rd, the company's last tweet went out saying, "We are sorry to announce that Thomas Cook has ceased trading with immediate effect." All around the world, at the very moment of their declaration of insolvency, flights were quite literally boarding, crews on board, planes fueled, ready to go. With the company now gone, though, everything had to stop. Those crews were no longer employed, that fuel wouldn't be paid for, the planes were no longer owned or leased by the airline, everything stopped. Of course, once an airline collapses and its flights are cancelled, there is no longer an airline to rebook passengers onto other flights. In most cases, passengers are just out of luck. But in the case of the UK, their Civil Aviation Authority essentially takes the place of any UK airline for the weeks following its collapse. The CAA will either rebook passengers onto another airline or just actually run their own flights. Of course, the CAA doesn't have their own fleet of planes. Rather, they have a number of airlines around the world essentially on retainer for any time they need to run repatriation flights. This includes plenty of charter operators like Highfly, Atlas Global, Wemos Air, and more, but perhaps the most unique aircraft used by the CAA was a Malaysian Airlines A380. The airline dedicates some of its A380s to charter operations, and so, the day before Thomas Cook's collapse, when it became clear that the end was nigh, the A380 flew empty all the way from Kuala Lumpur to Manchester. It landed a couple minutes past midnight on September 23rd, just a few short hours before Thomas Cook was officially declared insolvent. As this and plenty of other aircraft pre-positioned, even while Thomas Cook flew its last flights, the CAA was able to start flying its repatriation flights the same day, and many passengers were only a few hours delayed even after their airline went belly up. The Malaysian A380 was assigned to fly flights from Palma de Mallorca, but part of the difficulty was that, from Palma, Thomas Cook had flown an enormous quantity of flights to an enormous number of destinations in the UK: London, Cardiff, Birmingham, East Midlands, Manchester, Newcastle, Glasgow, and Belfast. Of course, it's much more complicated to find 8 small planes than just one large plane, so that's what they did. They found the largest passenger plane in the world. Every flight the A380 flew ran just the 2 hours from Palma to Manchester, and then from Manchester, buses ran to Glasgow, Newcastle, East Midlands, Birmingham, and London. Using this system, with just one aircraft, the CAA was able to run up to 3 flights a day from Palma to the UK with capacity for nearly 1,500 passengers, the equivalent to almost 7 Thomas Cook A321s. This whole process went on for weeks, making for a lucrative payday for the world's charter companies and an expensive bill for the UK government, but it certainly is easier than having hundreds of thousands of passengers stranded worldwide. Having a record-breaking airline collapse and then another record-breaking airline collapse in the span of 2 years is certainly not normal, and it's certainly not a coincidence. Part of the problem is that the airline industry has been so robust in the past decade that it has allowed weaker airlines to survive. Out of the bankrupted airlines mentioned at the start, Monarch, Air Berlin, Premier Air, Cobalt Air, WOW Air, Aigle Azur, XL Airways France, Adria Airlines, and Thomas Cook, 5 were focused on long-haul, low-cost flying. This business model is a rather new phenomenon made possible, at least on paper, by smaller fuel-efficient long-haul aircraft and low fuel costs, but outside of Asia and Australia, no airline has really achieved sustained profitability with this model. AirAsia X, Scoot, and Jetstar are really the only airlines worldwide that have seen long-term financial success flying long-haul low-cost. After fuel prices plummeted in 2014, these airlines entered a period of rapid expansion as they were able to undercut the incumbents' prices significantly, but then, in 2017, fuel prices started ticking back up and these airlines had a tough choice. They could either raise prices and lose some of the market share they had built up, or keep prices the same and grow further away from profitability. Many chose the latter, and as fuel prices continued to rise, the companies began to fall. Many analysts have also suggested that another contributing factor to this spate of airline collapses is overcapacity. Somewhat as a result of how successful and profitable the industry has been over the past decade, airlines have been buying planes like crazy, and investors have been funding airlines like crazy. For a while, the rule has been that adding more capacity means more profits. However, the industry has likely found a ceiling to that rule. This is especially true in Europe's market, where buying an additional plane that you might be able to fill in the summer means paying for it throughout the long winter too, when it might sit empty. What's for sure though, is that Thomas Cook will not be the last to fall. It is only getting tougher to survive as an airline, especially in Europe, and each year, without fail, another big name too will topple in September or October. The latest victim in the world's annual airline culling season. One of the ways that Wendover Productions functions as a business, and stays out of bankruptcy of course, is through merchandise sales. We sell a few types of t-shirts for both Wendover and Half as Interesting, which is a nice predictable income source that we control. Creating an online store at first seemed daunting, but then we came across Shopify. Shopify is a super simple yet advanced solution to creating and running your online store. They are designed to be a partner to independent businesses, as features like a logo maker, plug-and-play store themes, marketing solutions, and much more make it easy to succeed. For your customers, it makes for a great buying experience, one that you've probably already used, as they're used by over 800,000 businesses worldwide, including mine, in case you want to try out the buying experience for a Wendover t-shirt. By going to shopify.com/Wendover, you'll be able to try Shopify for free for 14 days, no credit card required, and then after that, pricing is as low as $9 a month.